There's been a big dramatic twist in federal politics today over the resignation of South Australian Senator Bob Day. It turns out the Family First representative may not have been qualified to run for Parliament at the July federal election, not because of his personal business problems, but because of something else. Come Monday, the matter looks set to head to the High Court for resolution. With the latest now is our political correspondent Sabra Lane. Sabra, what's happened?
Well, Lee, Mr Day formally tendered his resignation this morning, effective immediately. There's been some confusion during the past fortnight since Mr Day flagged his intention to quit because of problems with his construction company. But last week he said he might stay on. Now, today, the President of the Senate wrote to all senators saying there were difficult constitutional questions that needed to be answered about Mr Day's position, that the President would seek legal advice before briefing the Senate next Monday when Parliament resumes. Now, people had assumed that these issues involve Mr Day's company and issues of insolvency, but that's not the case. It's understood the government has raised concerns relating to whether Mr Day has a financial interest in the ownership of his electoral office and whether he receives rent from the Commonwealth for that office, and that might mean he was ineligible to stand at the July election.
So why does any of this matter?
Well, it's significant as it could have a big impact on the composition of the Senate. With 3 sitting weeks left this year, the coalition's anxious to get legislation through Parliament, specifically the resurrection of the building watchdog, the ABCC, which Mr Day had favoured. But this puts a big spanner in the works. The government wants the Senate to refer the matter to the High Court, essentially to rule on who takes Mr Day's place. Now, that may not happen quickly. If the court finds that Mr Day was ineligible, it could rule the next candidate on the Family First ticket takes the vacancy, and incidentally, that's not the person that Mr Day wants to replace him. However, the court might order a recount. Now, Labor was edged out by Family First for the last Senate spot in South Australia, and not surprisingly, the opposition is seeking its own legal advice tonight, as is the Family First party. We've just received a statement from the party. It says it's getting legal advice and it says it had no prior knowledge of these allegations, and it also says that Mr Day denies any pecuniary interest ever existed. Lee.
OK, thanks, Sabra. Well, Bob Day had been hoping to find some way to salvage his business and somehow win a last-minute reprieve to stay in the Parliament, as Sabra Lane just said there. Another of our reporters, Alex Mann, has been digging into his business dealings.
A fortnight ago, Bob Day shocked Canberra by announcing his intention to quit politics. But he lingered, suggesting he'd stay on in the Senate by pinning his hopes on a financial white knight to save his construction business.
Obviously, from our party's point of view, we'd have liked to have this situation handled more quickly and more precisely. It hasn't turned out that way.
Those hopes were dashed for Bob Day this morning when the mystery investor backed away from buying the company. The Family First representative tendered his resignation via letter, effective immediately, saying he was sorry it ended this way, but he left it to others to do the talking.
Should he be standing in front of the cameras today and explaining himself? He's been ducking and weaving for weeks. Is this cowardly?
It's surprising that he's not standing in front of the cameras today. I thought he would.
Is he gutless?
I don't think this is a time for recriminations.
Today marks the political end of a man whose housing business has left a trail of broken dreams stretching back for decades. In the early 1990s, Bob Day was the head of the Housing Industry Association and a fierce free market advocate.
Had the private sector been allowed to manage land supply like it's managed housing supply, we'd be enjoying land prices significantly lower than they are today.
His company Homestead Homes was on the rise, but so were the complaints of shoddy workmanship.
The allegations relate to 5 homes in Adelaide's northern, northeastern and southern suburbs.
The home featured in this report had countless defects, and 26 years later, its owner Mark Glasson is still finding faults.
Well, this is the ensuite shower alcove. I've had to rip the floor up and the walls out and replace all of those like I've done in the main bathroom, because the moisture's come out through the concrete slab where they punctured through the slab and haven't fixed them up. If you look in the corner over here, there's still one of the holes visible
At the time, Mark Glasson made a confidential complaint to the Department of Public and Consumer Affairs. But when the news of the defects got out, Bob Day retaliated. His company, Homestead Homes, sued the South Australian state government for defamation and made a $4.5 million claim for damages caused to his business.
We rounded up initially 15 clients and finished up with 5 in this action here because the other ones are like me, distressed, couldn't front up to court and tell their stories.
The court dismissed Bob Day's case and found that his company had failed to carry out repairs as agreed and had charged Mark Glasson for work that didn't happen. Does it worry you to think that other families might be going through the exact same thing that you went through nearly 30 years later?
Of course it does. I know it did to me, and it'll be doing the same thing to a lot of other people.
As Bob Day's building empire continued to grow, he purchased development companies across the country, and in 2007, his aspirations took a political turn.
He's got the whole world in his hands, he's got the whole wide world in his hands, he's got the whole...
But those hopes hit a sour note when he lost an election and failed to gain Liberal pre-selection in another seat 12 months later. Instead, he jumped ship and joined Family First.
Family First is concerned at the moment at the number of people who are under pressure because of high cost of living. It doesn't need to be that way. Our politicians are just managers doing a job, and if they're no good, they should be sacked.
But while Bob Day's attention was focused on politics, his business dealings began to unravel. Financial reports from 2013 and 14 detail a business swimming in debt.
The question as to whether Day or anyone else is going to get sued about that is there insurance?
In 2014, the company had $48 million of debt and just $16 million in assets. An independent audit conducted in 2015 was damning.
The company's position was precariously balanced as at 2013 and 2014. Added to that, the auditor's qualification of the accounts, that's a very bad sign.
But while the company was making big losses, Bob Day and his business partner paid themselves an almost $2.7 million dividend, and Bob Day gave hundreds of thousands of dollars in donations to Family First. Those records weren't made public until after Bob Day was officially re-elected to the Senate on August 2 this year.
Some of the themes that come through from Mr Day's work is real self-interest. Self-interest in terms of working hard to deregulate the building industry, which at the end of the day would boost the profits in his companies and his mates' companies, and also using political donations from his companies to bankroll him into the Senate. Meanwhile, so many of those people left in the lurch because of his company's activities really are in financial stress.
Green Senator Lee Rhiannon says there needs to be more transparency around political donations.
What's happened with Family First and Mr Day and how they've used political donations puts another spotlight on the urgent need for far-reaching reforms.
OK, this is the new place, so let's come in and have a look and I'll show you the issues that we've got throughout the house.
For the hundreds of families and contractors burnt by Home Australia, a legislative agenda is the furthest thing from their minds.
As of today, I'm just over $280,000 out of pocket.
Shane Summerhayes and the other creditors will meet with liquidators on Thursday and Friday this week. There's almost no chance they'll get all their money back.
I would like to see anyone, whether it be Liberals, Labors, backbenchers, shadow ministers, I think everyone should be putting a bit of pressure on Bob because, again, what he's doing to Australian people, it's just not right.